your host of Tacos and Trends. Welcome to Tacos and Trends, the podcast hosted by Made Trends, where we explore the inflection of culture, consumer behavior, and trends shaping tomorrow. Today, we're diving into a topic that impacts every brand, retailer, and consumer out there, the economic trends that are shaping markets in the year ahead, from shifting consumer spending habits to the ripple effect of global events. We'll explore what's happening economically and how it's influenced trends across all industries. I'm joined today by my good friend and Paul Mitchell of Maul Mitchell Consulting. You can find him at PM Tools LLC. Paul and I have known each other, I would say, for a long time, but from a business aspect over the past 5 or 6 years. He's been helping us develop the model and build Made Trends, and also has helped us launch our new Tacos and Trends. So we're going to talk about that as well. If you like what you hear today, click the subscribe button below and follow us on social for more information. Thank you for joining us.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
You're welcome. As I mentioned, I'm nervous, Paul, because you've been such a mentor. I don't want to say the wrong thing here after so many things, but I appreciate your time. And maybe you could just tell us kind of what your secret sauce is. Like, how do you help businesses? What's like the first thing you look for? Because I know that you'll be very like humble about it, but I know you're helping lots of different businesses grow in different ways. And what do you think? I feel like you have like a magic secret sauce, but it's very unique in the marketplace today. What do you think? What do you think it is?
I think there's a need to know technically what you're about. You need to know, for one business that I spent a lot of my life working in, it was precast concrete. So in that business, I needed to know how to make concrete. But the beauty of that business is that I had the opportunity to shape the way people work together. And it's really that, and that's what I did with Made Trends as well, for the most part, was tried to knit together a band of consultants, a band of remote folks working together. And I think that's the skill that people call a soft skill. But it's absolutely one that is lost, because most people try to manipulate their way through that. You know, they try to build codes, and they have false sort of relationships with people based on what they think it should be. The fact is, the beauty of my relationships are that they're very authentic. And it's, you know, as you said, you were worried about making a mistake or something. I make mistakes all the time. And so it's that relationship that you have with other folks that allows you to make those mistakes, simplistically said, learn from them, and then move on from there. But it's really about helping people find their own agency.
Yeah, I think that's like, I wouldn't have been able to sum it up so clearly, but I think that's like exactly it, right? I think it's 2 points you hit on that for me have been really valuable. This idea of like exactly how the machine of the business is going to work, right? Like, what's the mechanism of it that's like could be applied to basically any business. And also, I think, which like speaks to the larger topic that we want to address today, I think for me, which ticked off a lot of like bells in the beginning, is I think like you really see a business almost as like, I'm going to speak for you, but like to sum it up, like almost like a community, and there you don't like such a hierarchy of divide, right? Like, I think your whole goal is like breaking that down. And I think my experience with you and seeing how you work with other people as well is like, you know, I don't think that you only come in to help with like the CEO or the president running the company. I think your perspective is very much like, are the employees happy? Can we keep this employee retention? And I think my own experience as well is that sometimes like ruffles like a little bit of like the CEO or owner's like feathers, because it's like a non-traditional view. But I think the impact is like very, very large, right? And also I saw it in my own business, right? It's like very, to quote something in like ideally, it's like very like Dale Carnegie, right? Like making sure like all like everyone's like friends and involved and feels comfortable. And I think which also was new to me is this like creating a space where like, oh, like we have a strong enough infrastructure that we can course correct and we can learn from mistakes. I think before I was almost like creating a bottleneck of like, oh, well, I don't want to make a mistake.
Yeah.
Right. And so, but it's like sometimes paralyzing, because sometimes you can't move forward and you can't do things unless you make mistakes. So I think that was very valuable.
And people feel when they do make mistakes in that non-healthy way, that there's retribution or there's guilt or there's blame or whatever you want to call it that's taken out. And that's absolutely not. I mean, if you did something like light a building on fire, I would probably blame somebody for that. But other than that, there's not much you can do. And I want to compliment you, because you brought up the word community, as a business as community. And I have to tell you that I probably have never shared this with you, but I got a Bachelor's of Arts degree from the University of California in Santa Cruz back in the late 70s. And the coursework that I did was called Community Studies. And
Wait,
so I was
interesting.
I was essentially being trained in an academic fashion for community organizing. And let me just say one thing, that the main tenet of a community organizer, and I carry this in my heart pocket to this day, is to organize themselves out of a job. And
Oh,
so the power of that is that you don't come in trying to elevate yourself. You don't come in trying to, gain power. What you do is you try to distribute capacity and opportunity so that others lift themselves up as well. And then you're out of a job. And that's the mantra that I carry with me.
I've actually never heard you sum that up, but I'm going to tell you, Paul Mitchell, which you probably don't know. I, for the first time, was let me do some background research. And remember how I told you I had some surprise questions I wasn't going to. A lot of them were based around this. Is I was oh, I had never thought to look, but I was wait, where did Paul go to university? Where does this come from? And also, I think you were also, if I understand correctly, at SLO at a moment that was very. Very I don't know what the word to say, very, with a lot of what people I think during the moment were considering a lot of hippie, liberal, right, dare I say socialism, it was where you could a place where you could actually consider those ideas, and during that time. And it's interesting. One of my other questions for you was why work like this, and not build a company of your own, a business of your own. Not that you don't have a business of your own, but you know what I mean, a product or something. Or why not a corporate job? But I think if that's the mantra, which I've seen, in fact, is that you want to work yourself out of a job. I think you just stole all my questions, Paul.
No, but it's very true. There aren't a lot of large corporate environments that would welcome the agitational nature of helping everybody else rise up, because they're hierarchical, and there's these glass ceilings between each of the layers of the hierarchy. And whether it's a religious congregation or a nonviolent organizing committee, or it's a business making concrete, I push against all of those ceilings constantly, because I see opportunity for others to rise up into those things. And so that I don't want to get too wordy about it, but it's really true. It's about community, and it's about organizing in a community. And anyway, so I'm constantly reminded.
Yeah, no, I love it. And I mean, I think that this friction is very notable. I've noticed it myself, even I'm oh, wait, you're my friend. And, but I think that you're unwavering on that. And so to pop over, I think just something that that really helps crystallize that idea is in my research on for this interview, Paul, I heard a rumor that there's was a time when you made a very strict guideline that you'd like to see upheld. This could be wrong, but let me see, about what your feeling is within a sizable business. What's in your perfect world, what's the largest pay gap between the lowest paid employee and the highest paid employee?
Well, I want to, if anybody ever does see this, I want them to know this is credible and authentic. I ran a business that was 150 employees, and 2 plants, and I made a overt statement to my controller and to my senior staff that I would never be paid more than 9 times the bottom wage. So that's a 1-to-9 ratio, or 9-to-1 ratio. So that would mean that if the bottom wage was $20,000, I would never be over 180. Does that make sense? And so it's astronomical now. People would laugh at that. Such a low rate. But I think it's I have experience having made that commitment. And so I think it's very possible
Yeah.
I raised 3 children, bought homes, did all that kind of stuff. So I lived lavishly as far as I'm concerned. And I was never compensated to any way or near the extent that people in large firms are now.
Yeah. No, it's
So
crazy as well whenever you say that. I'm sorry, you said it's like 9%, Paul?
1 to 9. So
1 to 9.
9 to 1, however you want, 9 to 1. Yeah.
Yeah, but it's crazy because whenever you hear that without the numbers attached to it, you're like, that's a huge difference, right? But then
Yeah.
whenever you do the maths of it, if you're starting someone like your entry level, people are like haloing around like minimum wage. I think that alone, like people hear that and they're like, ugh. Like if you're like the senior staff, you're like, oh, absolutely no, like he's gonna ruin my vacations.
Well,
But I
yeah.
think,
Yeah.
go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say that if you think about 2,000 hours a year of annual time that you get paid for, and you're at $20 an hour, that's $40,000. A
Yeah.
9 to 1 nowadays would at $20 an hour would be $360,000 for the president or the the CEO. Now, that's a lot more than I ever had because we weren't. That was a long time ago is what I was saying. But the 9 to 1 would still be appropriate for today, and actually would be a relief to most employer relationships. You know what I mean?
I think that's the huge difference. I think if you action that and it's like actually known like within like a larger organization, I think it like decreases the tension, right? Because I think and I want to get to our main topics as well, is like I think what we see right now, right? Whenever we talk about like the marketplace that we work in, and I think we talk about the market because we're in this like situation of selling goods, right? We're telling people how to sell goods, specifically at Made Trends of like, here's what the strategy is. But what we see is like an economy, right, that's getting pulled tighter and tighter. And I think when we had this conversation, right, like it's this, like the divide keeps getting bigger and bigger. And you see like the tensions breaking out from it. It makes it harder to do business. And I think also whenever we talked about it, that I think you're so good at just like making it easy to understand, right? Like basically there's like a very small percentage of the American population gaining wealth,
Yeah.
and an increasing like population that's like impoverished.
Yeah.
Correct?
This is a huge dynamic that is churning through our social and cultural mechanisms right now. And that is for the last 50 years. There's a lot of statisticians and economists looking at this, but the bottom 90% of the population have stayed essentially at the same income level for the last 50 years. I mean, that's adjusted for inflation and that sort of stuff. But the top 1% has grown astronomically. The transfer of wealth from that lower tier to that upper tier has been in the 50s of billions of dollars that the change has happened. And that's where little things like the control mechanism of setting a 10 to 1 or a 15 to 1 cap on lowest wage to CEO would minimize, at least emotionally, that distance. And what's happening now is that there's no control on that. There's nothing stopping the growth of that distance. And that distance is what's causing discomfort in what they call the populist sort of sector of the political environment. And that's what we have to work on, is how not just how do we better talk to the right or the better talk to the left, but how do we start to build from the middle, rather than have the top trickle it down when it's not working, because that separation is becoming wider and wider. How do we build a solid middle? And that's a legitimate question.
No, definitely. And I think as well, like when we were talking through this and like we were looking at some of the references that you had sent over as well, right? I think what like keyed off for me that was like, I think so obvious, because I think sometimes whenever you bring like you like paint a picture of like what it really means, it's easier for people to digest, right? It's not just like numbers and like a divide. But I think here in California, and we see it in New York as well, and in a lot of the country as well, I think a very, very easy way to see that there's like a huge issue with that is like through affordable housing.
Yeah.
Like how you it's crazy. And I know that on where your old plant is well, we also see it where people can't afford to like live near where they work. So you actually have them parking and living in their cars or RVs next to their work. And that's like the only way they can manage to, even though they're making minimum wage, is there's no like there's such a divide of like what the cost of living is and like what like that minimum wage is. And I think as well, when you talk to like a lot of like people in who are like in the middle and not in that like 1%, right? It's interesting also to like there's obviously a problem whenever you have like quote like a good paying job or you're like quote successful, and still there appears to be a housing crisis, right? Like the shift is off. And so I think for me, that's, I also know like homelessness is and unhousedness is a topic close to your heart. But for me, that's like when people can't even have a place to live, how are you going to get people to work? And how are you going to have them happy at work? And how are you going to build businesses? And if we don't have all that, how are we even going to have product to sell to people?
And the literature today of relating to the issues of people facing homelessness, there is this recurring story of a Starbucks barista living in her car.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, and she's working full time and she can't afford a place to, and so it's repeated across the journals. And so that's really an important element. And I don't want to get into too deep in this, but I just want to make sure that I clarify something here, that when you look at homelessness, there's a lot of people who look at it and come up with sort of breakdowns to stratify the nature of homelessness. There are durable homeless people. Those are people who are probably suffering from a confluence of mental illness and drug addiction, and they're really pretty far deep into their own personal head. That's probably 20% of the folks who are experiencing homelessness. But the rest of the 80% are transient homeless. They're in and out of homelessness. They're trying to get in and out of it. So it's important to understand that there's a lot of faces to homelessness, and we might be missing it by lumping them all into, well, they're not pulling themselves up by their bootstraps. You know, it's not true.
No, definitely. I think that's like very interesting, like a very good point. And I think it's crazy, like when you think, and I think whenever you talk about that, like transient, these are people who have jobs, right? Are like raising their children from cars. Like, I think as well, honestly, not to, I try not to ruffle as many feathers. And I also try not to make things like political, but I think as well, if you look, just to make it political for a moment, I think if you look just at like the banner of the inauguration and you see the income level there and who was sat there, it's interesting to think who has their feet exactly planted in the reality of what like day-to-day life looks like. And it's like scary to think, oh, you're going to like drive how business and how like the economy is driven. It was, as a side note, also frightening by the like lack of like female representation.
Yeah. Or authentically honored female representation, sort of stereotypical models of females are up there, but not, they don't value those things. And the other iconic moment of that was that all of those less income generating people were not even inside.
I know.
At the inauguration, they were all outside, and the only people inside were billionaires. So it was quite astounding.
Yeah, I personally can't relate to that situation, so it would have been nice to have someone like more like relatable on the inside.
Oh.
That's unfortunate. As one of my hot questions, which it might surprise you, but speaking of this like representation, I think part of what else, and maybe it comes from like your time at SLO, is I would ask, like, I feel like, Paul, do you consider yourself a feminist?
Yeah, I do, but in a maybe in a more classic sense than folks today do, because I was raised in that crucible of college and post-college, that really malleable time in your life, by really developing women who were really developing a sense of feminism. It was at that time when it was coming out. And so there were some basic mind shift changes. What people are working through today around privilege and that sort of stuff, we didn't call it privilege around feminism, but it was essentially a set of privileges that I was forced as a young man to reconcile. And believe me, the women who were in my life were quite strong, and they beat the crap out of me if I didn't recognize the change that I needed to make. So I fondly call myself a feminist. But
It's so would
but
I.
I don't know how it fits in today's sort of social media world, because
Yeah.
there's so much trepidation out there. Anyway,
No,
to take a chance here, I live in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, and I went to a hockey game last night, and there was a couple, a 55-year-old man and his 55-year-old wife. They looked like that, and I opened the door for the wife, and I recognized what I was doing, and she was very grateful, as was her husband, who also walked in while I was holding the door, just so you know. So, but there are still those attributes of authentic life that aren't necessarily lifting up my state of privilege.
yeah.
And so I will do that. And so that may, on the social media thing, that may not pass the test, if you get
Yeah.
what I'm saying. So
I think what we're seeing as part of the topics we've been researching as well, right? Social media and what we were just talking about before this call, right? You can make anything like smoke and mirrors on the internet now, right? Which is like hard for people to remember. Also like frightening whenever you look at the statistics and you see Gen Z is using social media as a search engine 70% of the time rather than Google. Not that Google is perfect, but it's definitely those are two for me very different beasts. And so I think that for me, I think where the line's drawn is like, how does it like action in real life? No, and I think that's also been like interesting for me. I think I would definitely put myself on the feminist side of things. And I think what's refreshing about like your authenticity is that you like allow for that, but recognize, I think that, I don't know how to explain it correctly, Paul, but it's refreshing to sit in a space where like someone recognizes that there are like issues maybe, or that there's different treatment. And I think that you're like happy to recognize those and to find ways to like just steamroll over them, right? Get them out of the way. I don't know if I'm explaining that right.
No, but I think that's right, and I think it's important. It's important to be receptive in that moment, particularly from a perspective of a white man. You have to be willing to learn, and you that also you have to. This is another part of that big cultural chasm that we're trying to cross here, is that people are afraid, because they don't know what the new things are. They don't know what the new, this whole fear of DEI and that sort of stuff. It's not rational fear. It's been stoked by people who want to create a unreal fear. But it is fear that people have, and I do have a great deal of sympathy for people who are afraid, because it limits their lives, and I try to uncork that in any dynamic, that whether it's at the grocery store or in business or at a meeting with a community group or something. When I laser in on fear, I have to catch myself and not get kind of angry or tensed up, but rather you have to try to move your way in a different way to respond to people's fear.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think that's like part of your like super sauce. Like you can read people and like you can find like strategies very quickly. And I mean, I think to give like specific examples with me, it was like very like refreshing when conflicts have occurred at work or things have occurred, and you weren't like afraid to be like, oh, that wouldn't have happened if you were a woman. Like that's clearly what's going on here. Whatever. Like we don't need to get like into the weeds of that, but like what's the strategy to get out of that? And I think for me, like just being like seen like that, like, oh, that, because we've been in places together and like how someone responds to you is different than how they respond to me. Yeah. And I feel like if there's a problem and like you come in, people are like, oh, this is no joke, but it could, and sometimes I'm well received as well, but it's like, it's nice to be seen and that you can like recognize like, oh, okay, that still happens. And like, here's what we can do to like move around it. And I think that's like perfectly said. Like you're completely capable of just like putting the fire out, right? Like just like it's like a blanket, like, okay, I don't know how you do it, but like that's eliminated. And now we can like get back to business.
And this is not to toot my own horn, but I'm trying to bring this up as an example. I was doing a remodel with a congregation, and I was spending a lot of time there. I spent days upon days upon days over a period of 5 months. And there was a woman there who was working with me, and I would take her up into the attic and show her what I was doing with the exhaust fans and show her how to install insulation and that sort of stuff. And then we got to this problem inside one of the bathrooms where we had to do a make it up as we were going along.
Yeah.
And I was trying to screw this board in here and screw it in down here, and there was a toilet fixture in the way, and I was getting a little frustrated. And she said, well, Paul, why don't we do it this way? And I said, sure, try it. And so she screwed it in. And at the end of the day, as we were leaving, she said to me, Paul, you're the first man who has ever taken my idea in that kind of situation and not made a question out of it or adopted it as his own idea, as his own response.
As his own.
Yeah. And so I didn't know I done that, is what I'm trying to tell you. Quite frankly, she was just my coworker. Clearly I had more experience in it. But to answer your question, I think, am I a feminist? I think that might have been the answer.
Yeah.
You get what I'm saying? And it just was experiential, the experiential answer. So
no,
anyway.
I think that that's very interesting. I think that's exactly it, right? I think you draw a good point. Like, there's nothing I hate more than taking my good solution and people adopting it for their own. There's like nothing that like pisses me off more. You've heard the ranting afterwards where I'm like, that is mine. Like, I mean, if it's
I've
wrong,
heard you say that before. So
it's annoying. It's frustrating.
I'm quite aware.
Just to be recognized the time here we're working with. So I think that, I think as well, just so like, I feel like we had a lot more. Paul, we're gonna have to have a follow-up session. I feel like
maybe not. Yeah.
Just scratched the surface, but I think as well, like, just to kind of what our goal of this session was honestly really kind of just to talk about the economy of like what the work environment looks like, right? And I think as well, you had some like very interesting takes as well whenever we're working through this of like, actually, like, we need to have a thriving middle class to build more wealth, right? That's like actually, and I think whenever we spoke originally, you spoke about like, that's actually like I feel like it's always so taboo to say, but like really like based on some of the like the principles of like Karl Marx and how he like sees like society working, right? Here, having lived in Europe for a long time, right? You're allowed to like use Karl Marx as a reference without it being such a large deal as here, without like anyone waving any flags. But so I think that's like interesting to think, right? The goal should be of this like community working together, building together, right? And honestly, this idea of like, it's the idea of business isn't to make like 1% rich, right?
Yes. The logic of business has been, and they call this neoliberal economics. The logic has been said, one of the tenets is that business is working for the profitability of their shareholders, for the benefit of their shareholders. Yeah. Well, that's only one of their stakeholders. Their labor force is another one. Their community that surrounds them is another one. And the future is a whole nother one. You know what I mean? There's all kinds of investments that the business is responsible to. It's not just the profit of the shareholders. And that again, that's the part that gets you labeled as a socialist or something like that. But we need to bust open some of those iconic myths in what, again, using the term neoliberal economics. That's not one that we want to continue. We need to change that. And
I think go ahead.
No, you go ahead. I was just going to elaborate on that, but that's good.
No, I think it's like when we're talking about like businesses and like just relating it back to like the work that we do, is I also think it's like very important to have that consideration, because I think we know that we have this like Gen Z who are really like taking over the marketplace with their spend, right? They're like trillions of dollars globally spent. And their expectation is that like businesses are running for them, that businesses are building community. And although they're young still and it's like starting, but there's an expectation of some transparency of like, what are like this machine of this business, what are you doing with it? Because I can buy stuff anywhere, right? Any of us can buy stuff anywhere. There's a million versions of it. So if like my wallet's going to be spent with you, like you have to make sure you're hitting like my values and like authentically doing it. Like I think you and I, when we won't name any names here, but we've seen like what we would more like in some of the sustainability work we do, like a lot of like smoke and mirrors. Mm-hmm. And like, who cares about the smoke and mirrors? The smoke and mirrors, right? It's very easy to see through them and be like, oh, those like in 30 years, that's great. But like, I think the customer, I think the worker, and from a consumer point of view, right? Which the worker and the consumer are sometimes this like one and the same. Absolutely. They want action today, not in 30 years. They want fair wages. They want like better communities.
And they do, and you know, people may not believe this in this social media fervor, but if you act authentically, if you really do believe in certain principles and you let loose and share those principles, people will watch you and they will count on you to do it the correct way. But if you do, then you have great credibility. I think there's a brand that I'll bring up that you and I haven't really talked about, but it's named Patagonia.
Yeah.
And Patagonia is marvelously respected, you know, and talk about earning caps between the lowest paid and the highest paid. Patagonia incorporates those. I can't give you the number, but I think it's quite responsible. And before I even talk about how their down jacket is stitched, I talk about the kind of ethics, the moral compass that Patagonia brings to us. So I just say that exists out there, and you can find it. And even within this social media tumult, you can find authenticity.
No, it's true. And I think that's like a very good, like, that's very much of like born out of your same generation, right? And authentically was already doing all those things before the customer, before the customer was demanding, long before Gen Z was demanding it on social media. It was already like stitched into like their jackets with their like ethos.
It absolutely is.
State it.
Yeah, that's perfectly stated. Yeah.
I'm going to just quote something else, or not quote, but just reference something else we talked about. I like this just to maybe wrap things up here.
Yeah, sure.
I like this idea whenever we talked about like marketplace, right? So this idea, the marketplace provides solutions to problems, right? And successful solutions are purchased. That's like, I feel like so clearly like what's happening here, right? And a lot of like what we do. And so I think whenever you think about them, right, this becomes like a social contract, which I think whenever you think about why people want this transparency, why people want community, why they want more, it's because it is like, I'm giving you your money, my hard-earned money, and like how that entire transaction works. I thought for me, it was just interesting whenever you talked about this, like marketplace provides solutions, right? Whenever we're so deep in like, what t-shirt do people want to buy and like what color is it? But at the end of the day, it's that people need t-shirts.
On a very high level, assessing the market as a valuable technology, I'll call the marketplace a technology in our lives, in our daily lives, takes us out of the socialist camp, because we become market-based. We become people who are saying there's capital involved and there's labor involved, and we bring it to the marketplace and we solve problems. I love that kind of marketplace. I absolutely do. It just needs to be conditioned. That's why this is not getting into, I don't want to get too much into this, but I love the marketplace, but I recognize that it can spin out of control when certain people are, aggrandizing themselves as opposed to responsibly participating. And by the way, that's the role of government, is to come in and say, we're going to help make sure that this market continues to be robust and inventive and creative, and it's also safe. It's also considerate of people, and it's considerate of the environment. That's the broader view of it, not just
I think
socialism.
This is like, and I think to take it away, the conversation away from there, so no one panics, right? It really is this idea of this like Venn diagram of like profit, people, right? And what the product is.
It is.
And making sure that all of those pieces are working. And I think it's timely, right? Because it feels like from all angles, we're at like holistically, like at an inflection point.
We are. And leadership is an important part in all of that. And I know it feels like a divergence, but I'm just going to tell you that I've struggled and learned and fought all my adult life to manage my role as a leader, whether it was in a collective print shop, whether it was, in a homeless shelter, whether it was in a concrete company, all those different environments. Leadership is critical, and we need to have real, careful, considerate leadership. I absolutely endorse that. I look for those people. You know what I'm saying? What I don't want to find is leadership that is puny and power hungry and negative. You know what I'm saying? That's the kind of stuff that is just antithetical to a successful environment.
I would take that one step further, Paul, and sing a few accolades. Thank you. Sorry, pardon me. Accolades of that. I think like you're not just looking for that. I think part of your like quest and your path is like building that. I mean,
Yeah.
I see like you're like, that's like a non-negotiable for you. The person doesn't have to get there today, but like it's very clear that that's like what the roadmap. I myself have experienced that, which I think is great because it's easier to get caught up in other things, and it's very nice to have like a guiding force being like, oh no, but this is the path here.
Yeah, that's so
So
true.
Paul,
Yeah.
I'm gonna wrap up for now,
Okay.
but we should do this again. Thank you so much for joining. Paul's contacts will be in the comments below. So if you're interested in learning more about his amazing leadership power and influence and helping your business grow, hit him up. And also tune in next week where we're going to focus on some hot topics in sustainability. This is Tacos and Trends, and I'm Autumn Zimmerman. Thank you. Thank you, Paul Mitchell.
Thanks, Autumn.
Bye.